I was fixing the collar of my suit when I felt the weight of her portrait staring back at me. The frame was heavy, the kind they use for people who meant something. My mother's eyes looked softer in it than they had near the end, and the sight stirred something sharp in my chest. I kept my hand on the edge of the easel, steadying myself, when my brother's voice cut through the room like a blade. "There he is," he said loudly, "the lifelong failure, still standing around doing nothing, same as always." The words hit before I fully turned. His laugh carried across the hall, bouncing off the rows of chairs and the quiet murmurs of people who'd come to pay respects. Conversations died one by one. I felt every pair of eyes shift toward me. My throat tightened, not from grief, but from the sting of being mocked in front of strangers, while my mother's face watched from the frame beside me. I didn't answer. I couldn't have, even if I wanted to. My body stopped moving the moment I realized he wasn't joking. He stood near the refreshments table, one hand in his pocket, smiling like he'd rehearsed the insult and was proud of how it landed. His wife stared at her shoes. A cousin looked away. No one said a word. The air felt heavier than it had moments before. I could hear the faint rattle of someone placing a cup down too quickly. My palms warmed where they gripped the easel, and I forced myself to breathe evenly. Shame doesn't arrive in one sharp motion. It spreads, slow and quiet, until it fills your spine. I stayed still, hoping the moment would pass without further poison. Then the doorway shifted. A man stepped inside, straightening his suit jacket as he scanned the room. It was my mother's lawyer. He didn't usually attend memorials. He wasn't family. His presence alone sent a small ripple through the crowd. My brother stopped smirking for a second, then folded his arms, pretending not to care. The lawyer approached us with a controlled expression, neither warm nor cold. "I need to speak with both of you privately," he said. His voice was low, firm enough to still the room. It wasn't a request. It wasn't ceremonial. It had weight to it. My brother scoffed, loud enough for the front row to hear. "Let me guess," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "Mom left instructions for me to handle everything, and now we all have to pretend this one." He gestured vaguely toward me. "Has a role in it." A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Someone cleared their throat. I didn't look at anyone. I kept my eyes on the lawyer, trying to read him. His jaw was tight. His eyes were sharper than usual. This wasn't the face of a man delivering routine paperwork. "There are matters that need clarification," the lawyer said. "It can't wait." My brother chuckled again, lighter this time, as if he already knew he had won whatever he thought was coming. He clapped me once on the back on his way past. The gesture wasn't affectionate. It was ownership, the kind someone uses when they believe the world bends in their direction. But the lawyer didn't move. He just stood there, watching me with a look I couldn't quite name. Not pity, not sympathy. Something heavier, something that made the back of my neck warm. I took a slow breath. My embarrassment was still there, rooted deep, but something new began to form beneath it. An uneasy pressure, the sense that the room had shifted in a direction none of the guests could see. My brother kept his confident stride, but I could feel the lawyer's attention on me, not him. That was the moment I knew his arrival wasn't routine. Whatever he was about to say, it wouldn't be the simple inheritance my brother thought he had already claimed. I stayed near her portrait after the lawyer walked away, pretending to adjust the flowers so I didn't have to face anyone. The room felt crowded, but I could only hear the faint hum of voices behind me. Standing there reminded me of the nights I spent in this same posture, quiet, waiting, listening for her breathing in the next room. I had lived with her during her final year, helping her wash, helping her sit up, helping her eat when her hands trembled too much to lift a spoon. She never asked for much, only that I stay close. I did. It felt like the only thing left I could give her. My brother didn't come often. He always had a reason ready before I even finished asking. "Work is more important," he'd say, and the words would hit with that usual mix of pride and dismissal. He liked to imagine himself carrying the world while I lived in the shadows. Even when we were younger, he took credit for things he never did. Fixing the garage door I repaired, helping her with bills I paid, visiting her on holidays when he hadn't shown up in months. He had a talent for rewriting the past so he could stand taller in it. But during her last week, something in him shifted. He appeared suddenly, showing up with flowers and long speeches about family. He sat by her bed with a supportive smile, leaning in close as if he were the one who'd kept her alive through those quiet nights. He brought her tea, changed her pillows, and checked her medications, pretending he knew the routine. It wasn't care. It was performance, and she was too tired to question it. I had brushed it off as guilt at the time. Some people only understand loss when it's inches away. But there were other signs, small things that didn't make sense then, but sit differently now. She had begun having private meetings with her lawyer, asking me to drive her and wait outside. She said it was just a formality, something about making sure things are simple later. She didn't want me in the room. That wasn't like her. She used to show me every letter, every medical paper, every bank statement. But those last few months, she kept certain folders close to her chest. I remember one afternoon, when they took longer than usual. When she finally came out, she looked tired, but there was something firm in her expression, something resolved. I asked if everything was all right. She said yes, but her hand trembled as she folded the lawyer's card back into her purse. She seemed relieved, not upset. Relieved in a way that didn't make sense until now. As she got closer to the end, my brother returned again and again, always with the same smile that didn't reach his eyes. He fetched water she didn't drink, asked questions she didn't answer, and stood beside her bed like someone practicing for an audience. I didn't say anything. Arguments had no place in a room where the air was thin. Now, watching the lawyer's steady gaze during the memorial, the pieces began shifting into place. His presence wasn't for ceremony. He hadn't come to pay respects. He'd come with purpose. The timing, the tone, the urgency. They mirrored the quiet meetings she'd had with him when she was still strong enough to speak for herself. My brother kept laughing with guests, pretending nothing was out of balance. But the lawyer's expression pulled something tight in my chest. It wasn't grief or anger or humiliation anymore. It was the sense that the simple version of the truth, the one where a mother leaves her belongings to the son who worked harder, wasn't the truth she left behind. Something about the inheritance wasn't straightforward. Something had been changed, and changed for a reason. And the lawyer hadn't come today to honor her. He'd come today to reveal something she didn't trust anyone else to say. My brother stayed close to the doorway after the memorial service ended, leaning against a column with the kind of posture men use when they want to be seen. He laughed too loudly, talked too freely, and repeated the same line to anyone who passed near him. "Mom always trusted the successful son," he said, tapping his chest with 2 fingers as if he needed everyone to remember who he believed that was. Every time he said it, he glanced toward me, waiting for a reaction he wasn't going to get. I walked past him without meeting his eyes, but his voice followed me through the room. I didn't understand his confidence. He acted like the matter was already settled, like the lawyer's presence had only come to confirm what he believed was his birthright. But the certainty in his tone didn't match the tension I'd seen in the lawyer's face. Something didn't align, and the space between those details felt wider the more I thought about it. While I helped gather the memorial booklets from the tables, a memory surfaced, one so small I almost missed it. Months before she passed, my mother had pressed a sealed envelope into my hand. She didn't explain it. She only said, "Keep this safe. Open it when it feels necessary." At the time, I didn't know what to make of it. I'd tucked it away in my bedroom drawer and never opened it. Now the weight of that moment felt different, like she had anticipated something she couldn't say out loud. As I moved between clusters of guests, I noticed how my brother's behavior shifted. Every time someone mentioned the lawyer, whether in passing or by accident, he would step in quickly, cutting the conversation short with a joke or a loud comment. He didn't want anyone discussing legal matters without him listening. He treated the room like a stage he needed to control, steering every glance and every sentence toward his version of the future. Later that evening, after everyone had gone, I returned to the house to gather some of my mother's belongings. I wasn't searching for anything in particular, but as I opened her desk drawer, several folders slid forward in a way that drew my attention. The top folder was thinner than I remembered. My mother was meticulous. She kept every document in order. This one had gaps, missing pages where financial statements should have been. I sifted through what remained, and a pattern emerged. The numbers didn't add up. There were unusual withdrawals, significant ones, made during months when my mother had been too weak to visit the bank. Some were marked with her signature, but the strokes looked rushed, uneven. I stopped turning pages and sat there quietly, letting the room settle around me. I didn't accuse anyone. I didn't even let the full idea form. I only knew the missing pages meant something wasn't intact. When my brother came by later to check on things, I asked a simple question, whether he knew anything about the irregular withdrawals. His reaction wasn't anger. It was avoidance. He straightened a picture frame on the wall and muttered something about helping her with expenses. But the way he shifted his weight told me it wasn't a conversation he planned to continue. His confidence earlier in the day now felt forced, like someone trying to outrun a truth he hoped would stay buried. He left quickly, claiming he had a meeting in the morning. He didn't look at the desk before he walked out. He didn't ask what I had found. He only hurried past the doorway, the way someone moves when they sense the ground beginning to crack. When I closed the desk drawer, I didn't feel resolved. I felt the first shape of suspicion settle into place. My mother's lawyer hadn't arrived to repeat the story my brother had already written in his own mind. He had come with something heavier, something she left behind for a reason. And whatever was in that sealed envelope in my bedroom drawer, I knew now it wasn't meant for a calm moment. It was meant for this one. I went to the lawyer's office the next morning, walking in without an appointment and pretending I only needed a little clarity. The lobby was quiet, the kind of quiet that holds its breath. I gave the receptionist my name, and when I mentioned my brother's, a faint tension pulled across her face. It wasn't dramatic. It was the small shift people make when they recognize trouble they aren't supposed to talk about. She asked me to wait a moment. I sat in one of the stiff chairs by the wall, pretending to read a framed certificate. Behind the partition, two staff members whispered in low voices. I hadn't meant to listen, but their words slipped through the narrow gap. "Did he bring up the altered documents?" one asked. The other hushed her quickly, but not before the phrase lodged itself in my mind. Altered documents. It wasn't something you heard in a routine legal office. The lawyer stepped out with a controlled smile. He gestured toward his door, and I followed him inside. The room smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood. He shut the door behind us, moved to his desk, and pulled out a thin folder. "These are the documents relevant to your mother's estate," he said, his voice steady, too steady. The folder he handed me was lighter than it should have been. I opened it slowly. The pages were neat, organized, but sparse, too sparse. Several sections had no supporting statements. Some footnotes referenced attachments that weren't included. It was a version of her file, but not the full one. I scanned the pages carefully, letting the inconsistencies speak louder than any accusation I could have made. He watched me, eyes fixed on my hands instead of my face. When I reached the last page, something caught my attention, a faint crease along the edge, as if another sheet had once been paper-clipped there. I didn't comment. I only closed the folder and placed it on my lap. "These will help," I said quietly, keeping my tone even. He nodded once, relieved that I wasn't asking the question he didn't want to answer. As he stepped out to take a phone call, I walked toward a side table where older files were stacked loosely. I didn't rummage. I didn't snoop. I only glanced at the top pages the way anyone might if they were left out. One draft near the top bore my mother's name. The date was earlier, months earlier than the version he'd just given me. And the content. I could see at least two major differences on the first page alone. Her signature placement was different. The beneficiary list had an extra notation. A line about property distribution had been removed entirely in the final version. I didn't take the draft. I didn't need to. Seeing it for even a few seconds was enough to confirm something had been changed, something significant. As I turned back, a paralegal crossed the room carrying a stack of envelopes. She paused when she saw me lingering near the files. Her expression held caution, but also something human, something sympathetic. She lowered her voice. "Some things weren't like this before," she said. There was pressure. She didn't say from whom, but she didn't have to. Her eyes shifted toward the hallway where my brother's name still seemed to echo. I nodded once to let her know I understood. She continued walking, never looking back. The lawyer returned, apologizing for the interruption, and escorted me out with the same professional calm. But as I stepped into the parking lot, the weight of the morning settled across my shoulders. The sanitized files, the altered draft, the missing attachments, all of it pointed in a direction I'd been hesitant to consider. Someone had manipulated my mother's estate. Someone had rearranged pieces of her final wishes when she was no longer strong enough to protect them. And the cracks that were beginning to show were no longer small. They were forming a path straight to the person who had the most to gain. I went through my mother's old paperwork that evening, spreading the folders across her dining table the way she used to when paying bills. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that settles when a person's presence is gone, but their habits still linger in the corners. While sorting through envelopes, I noticed one statement addressed from a bank she never used. The seal was unbroken. I opened it carefully, expecting a mistake. It wasn't a mistake. It was a record for an account I'd never heard of. An account opened 2 years ago in her name. The balance was nearly nothing, but the withdrawal history told a different story. Large transfers, spaced over months, all drained before she passed. The amounts weren't random. They matched familiar figures, numbers I'd seen before while reviewing my brother's business debts. I sat back, letting the pattern settle in my mind. It was too precise to be coincident. I called him, keeping my voice level. I mentioned the account without showing my hand. He didn't hesitate. He laughed, a short, shallow sound as if I'd accused him of stealing loose change. "That was just a harmless loan from Mom," he said. "She knew I needed help. Don't act surprised." He brushed it off like it was nothing. Draining thousands from a dying woman was something families accepted. I didn't argue. I let him end the call on his own smug note. But the ease in his tone, the dismissiveness, it pressed something tight against my ribs. He wasn't worried. He wasn't even cautious. He acted as if he believed no one could touch him. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from the lawyer. He asked to meet urgently and privately, adding a line that felt deliberately vague. "There are developments you need to be aware of." His restraint only deepened the sense that something had reached a breaking point. Lawyers didn't use words like that unless they were trying not to alarm a client prematurely. When I met him the next morning, he didn't waste time. He closed the blinds, lowered his voice, and placed a thin document on the desk between us. It was an updated version of my mother's will, dated just weeks before she passed. "She made these changes after discovering irregularities," he said quietly. "She suspected financial betrayal." He didn't say my brother's name, but he didn't need to. The implication was clear in the way he pushed the document toward me instead of handing it over directly. Seeing her handwriting again, the shaky but determined strokes hit harder than I expected. She had known. She had seen something and taken steps to protect herself, and maybe to protect me. I felt anger, but it wasn't loud. It settled deeper, colder, grounded in the realization that she had been dealing with this while her strength was slipping away. Later that afternoon, my brother showed up at the house unannounced. He walked in without waiting for an invitation, pacing the living room with twitchy energy. "You need to stay quiet about the account," he said. "Not a request, a command. This isn't a big deal unless you make it one. If you start digging around, you'll make things worse for everyone." I watched him carefully. His confidence from the memorial was gone, replaced by something restless, almost frantic. He kept rubbing his palms together, eyes darting around the room like he expected someone else to be listening. He wasn't here to explain himself. He was here to control the story. When he finally left, the house felt colder, not because of anything he said outright, but because of what he didn't say. The empty spaces where guilt should have been. The pressure in his voice, the agitation in his movements, the sudden urgency to silence me. All of it pointed toward the same truth. He didn't just betray her financially. He intended to shut me out completely. And now that I had seen the pieces she left behind, I understood just how much he needed me to stay blind. The lawyer called me back to his office the next morning, asking me to come alone. His tone was flat, almost clinical. The way professionals speak when they're preparing someone for something they can't soften. When I arrived, he closed the door with unusual care and reached into a locked drawer. He pulled out a small sealed envelope, older, worn at the edges, with my mother's handwriting on the front. He placed it on the desk between us without saying anything for a moment. "This is an addendum she wrote herself," he said. "She instructed me to release it, only under certain circumstances." His fingers tapped once against the envelope before he pushed it toward me. I picked it up slowly, feeling the ridge of dried glue under my thumb. The seal had been unbroken since the day she wrote it. Inside, her message was short. The handwriting was shaky, but the meaning was sharp. She wrote that someone close to her had been misusing her trust, someone who had taken advantage of her when she was weak. She didn't name him, but she didn't need to. Every line pointed in the same direction, toward the person who had drained her hidden account and expected her silence. I folded the paper carefully and slid it back into the envelope. The lawyer watched me with a steady expression. "She was afraid," he said. "She hinted at coercion. I suspected something was wrong, but she refused to name the person. She only said she was correcting her mistake." He walked to a cabinet and retrieved another folder. This one was thicker. He opened it to reveal photocopies of older will drafts. The signatures were nearly identical, but the paralegal stepped into the room and pointed out the differences. "These were altered," she said. "Parts were traced, others were overwritten. It's subtle, but it's there." I examined the signatures closely. The pressure differences, the uneven ink flow, the small hesitations in strokes. These weren't natural variations. They were manipulations. Someone had tried to keep an older draft intact long enough to benefit from it. My brother's calls started while I was still in the office. At first, they were sharp and irritated. Then they turned panicked. By the time I reached the parking lot, he had called 4 more times. Each voicemail sounded more unhinged than the last, demanding we stay aligned, insisting we keep things simple, warning me not to stir up trouble. He wasn't trying to explain himself. He was trying to contain me. I didn't return any of the calls. I sat in my car with the engine off, feeling the quiet press around me. My mother hadn't asked me to take sides during her life. She had avoided conflict, trusted too easily, hoped her sons would eventually find their way back to each other. But near the end, when her strength was thin, she had chosen something different. She had chosen protection for herself and for me. That realization settled with a weight that felt both painful and clarifying. She hadn't updated the will to punish him. She had done it because she finally saw what he was capable of when no one was watching. It wasn't about inheritance. It was about safeguarding the only person who had stayed. I could feel the point of no return forming in front of me, like a path I had already stepped onto. The sanitized files, the altered drafts, the drained account, the frantic calls, they all pointed to a truth he'd spent months trying to bury. And now the will reading was the one place where everything could be placed in the open, where his confidence could no longer mask the cracks in his story. I started the car slowly, gripping the wheel with steady hands. I wasn't angry. I wasn't afraid. I was resolved. Whatever happened during that reading, I would not stay quiet. My mother had left me the pieces. Now I knew what she wanted me to do with them. I spent the next morning at the dining table with every document spread out in neat rows. The bank statements, the altered draft, the addendum in my mother's handwriting. Each piece felt heavier now that I understood how they fit together. I organized them slowly, making sure nothing overlapped, nothing hid another. The table looked like a quiet map of the truth she left behind, a truth she must have hoped someone would follow. I placed the sealed addendum at the center, as if giving her voice the place it had been denied for too long. When I met with the lawyer again, he didn't hide the weight of what was coming. He closed his office door and rested both hands on the back of his chair before speaking. "I'll be reading the final updated will at the end of the memorial gathering," he said. There was no hesitation in his tone, but there was something measured in it, like a man preparing for something unpleasant but necessary. I nodded once. I didn't need details. His certainty told me enough. Later that afternoon, my brother showed up unannounced. He didn't knock. He never did. He walked in with quick steps and eyes that refused to settle. "You're meddling," he said, as if stating a simple fact. "You're digging into things you don't understand." He hovered near the doorway, his fingers tapping the frame behind him like he needed something solid to hold on to. His face twitched with a tension he tried to hide behind forced calm. I didn't rise from my chair. I didn't defend myself. I simply folded my hands and let him fill the space with his own panic. The more I stayed silent, the more his composure frayed. His sentences grew messy, looping into each other, and he kept glancing toward the table as though expecting to see evidence laid out in plain sight. He didn't notice the quiet shift in our positions. He wasn't the one assessing me anymore. I was watching him. Family began arriving early for the memorial continuation that evening, and it didn't take long for them to notice his behavior. He snapped at an aunt who asked how he was holding up. He paced near the back of the room, muttering into his phone. He hovered by the hallway where the lawyer was speaking with distant cousins, trying to listen without appearing desperate. His confidence from the first day was gone, replaced by a jittery urgency he couldn't disguise. I kept my distance, offering simple nods to those who greeted me. I didn't mention the documents. I didn't hint at what was coming. My calm wasn't an act. It was the clarity that comes when someone has already shown you who they are, and there is nothing left to interpret. The lawyer moved through the room with a quiet purpose, carrying the file tucked under one arm like it was fragile. Every time our eyes met, he gave the smallest nod, an unspoken confirmation that we were aligned in what needed to happen. As more family filled the room, the atmosphere shifted. Conversations dulled into low murmurs. People sensed something tense beneath the surface, something heavier than grief. My brother kept adjusting his tie, wiping his palms against his pants, and watching the doorway as though expecting a verdict to walk through it. When the final guests arrived, the lawyer stepped forward and positioned himself beside my mother's portrait. He rested the leather folder on the podium and opened it with a controlled motion. The room fell silent in an instant. The sound of the latch clicking open felt louder than any voice. I stood near the back, hands steady at my sides, breathing in the stillness before everything changed. The lawyer looked out at the gathered family, his expression firm but respectful. There was no ceremony in his posture, no softness, only duty. This was the moment the truth would leave the shadows she kept it in, and the room was ready for it, whether my brother was or not. The lawyer cleared his throat and began reading the first lines, his voice steady and measured. He hadn't even reached the second paragraph when my brother pushed forward from the front row. "We can skip all that," he said, loud enough to break the stillness. "Everyone knows what she left. Mom trusted the child who actually did something with his life." He laughed under his breath, turning slightly so the room could see his confidence. The lawyer didn't acknowledge him. He simply continued reading, his tone unchanged, as though my brother's interruption were nothing more than background noise. The shift came when he unfolded a smaller sheet tucked behind the main pages. His voice softened, not out of emotion, but out of respect. "This is a personal letter your mother requested be read alongside the will." He paused only long enough for the room to absorb the gravity of that sentence. My brother's smile faltered, his jaw tightening. The lawyer read the first line slowly, each word landing with quiet force. She wrote about trust, how it could be misused by those closest to her, how she had seen things in her final year that frightened her more than her illness, how someone had taken advantage of her weakened state to access what was not theirs. She didn't name him, but every line pointed to a betrayal that the people in the room could now feel without needing the details. The dignified tone of her words made the truth heavier, steadier, impossible to dismiss as paranoia or confusion. Then the sentence that shifted the room entirely. "I changed my will because, in the end, I saw who protected me." My brother's breath caught, an audible hitch that pulled attention toward him. His voice cracked as he stepped forward again. "He put those words there," he snapped, pointing at me. "He manipulated her. He's been trying to twist things since she got sick." The accusation hung in the air, brittle and desperate. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The lawyer held up a hand, not to silence him, but to hold the moment steady. "There are documents your mother submitted privately," the lawyer said, pulling out another folder. His tone remained calm, factual. "These include earlier drafts and records that were altered without authorization." He placed the copies on the podium. "And the financial statements she provided to this office show significant withdrawals, matching your business debts." A ripple moved through the crowd. Not loud, but unmistakable. Chairs shifted. Someone exhaled sharply. My brother's face drained of its practiced confidence. He stepped back, shaking his head, muttering something about lies and conspiracy, but the room no longer moved with him. The evidence was too precise, too detailed to dismiss with bluster. He turned toward the exit with quick, jerky steps, as if escape might undo the truth. But when he reached the doorway, two relatives stood there instinctively, not blocking him aggressively, just standing in the space he tried to claim. Their presence alone was enough to stop him. No one grabbed him. No one raised a hand. They just watched, and in their eyes was the same realization settling over the room. He wasn't leaving in triumph. He was leaving in exposure. The lawyer continued reading, finishing the provisions with the same even tone, making sure every line of her final wishes carried the weight she intended. My brother's breathing grew shallow, angry but cornered, his gaze flicking from one person to another as though searching for someone who still believed him. No one spoke. No one defended him. I remained where I was, hands steady at my sides, letting the truth speak without adding to it. The confrontation had already happened, not with shouting, but with the clarity my mother left behind. When the reading ended, the lawyer closed the folder gently, as if closing a door that had been waiting too long to be shut. The lawyer acted quickly after the reading. The moment the room began to thin out, he gathered the folders and stepped into a smaller office down the hall. He asked me to follow, keeping his voice low as he explained that he would be filing a formal complaint for fraud and coercion that same afternoon. There was nothing dramatic in the way he said it. No outrage, no speeches, just a measured description of the steps required when someone tampers with legal documents. His tone made it clear this was procedure, not emotion. 2 days later, the bank investigation began. They reached out after reviewing the statements I'd provided. A representative called me with a voice as steady as the lawyer's had been. She confirmed the withdrawals had not been authorized by my mother in person, nor were they consistent with her usual habits. The timestamps matched moments when she had been bedridden. They recorded the transactions as likely unauthorized, a phrase that settled heavily even through the phone line. She explained they would be forwarding the findings for legal review. Word moved quietly through the family after that. A few cousins called to ask questions they had been too polite or too doubtful to voice before. Each conversation carried the same tone, a soft mixture of shock and regret. They admitted they had always believed my brother's polished version of himself, the one he displayed at holidays and reunions. More than one apologized for assuming his confidence meant he was telling the truth. Their apologies weren't dramatic or emotional. They were simple acknowledgments, the kind people offer when they finally see what was in front of them. When the lawyer notified me that the home was legally mine per my mother's updated wishes, I didn't feel victorious. I walked through the house in slow steps, touching the backs of chairs and the edges of framed photos. She had spent her final months trying to ensure things were stable for me, and the weight of that settled deeper than any property document could. The rooms felt different now, not because of ownership, but because I finally understood what she'd been trying to shield me from. My brother's situation unfolded quietly. There were no dramatic arrests, no scenes. The lawyer informed me that he had been advised to seek representation of his own. He stopped calling me. Relatives said he'd been avoiding gatherings and keeping to himself. When he did appear at one brief family meeting arranged by the district attorney's office, he walked in with his shoulders slumped, eyes down, looking nothing like the man who once filled rooms with noise and certainty. He answered questions with short, tense phrases. When it ended, he slipped out before anyone could speak to him. His departure wasn't angry or loud. It was small, almost hollow. I didn't follow him. There was nothing left to say. After the legal steps were set in motion, the lawyer visited the house one last time to finalize the remaining paperwork. He reviewed each page with the same calm professionalism he had carried throughout. When he left, the silence in the house felt different, no longer tense, just still. That night, I sat in the living room with the lights low, letting the quiet wrap around me. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel vindication. What settled inside me was something more grounded, a sense of clarity that came from finally seeing the truth without distortion. The betrayal was real. The loss was real. And the consequences were now unfolding where they belonged, within the systems designed to handle them. I leaned back in the chair my mother used to sit in during winter evenings. The room felt steady again. Not healed, not restored, just steady. And after everything, that steadiness was enough. In the weeks after everything settled, the house felt different in ways I couldn't name at first. The stillness wasn't sharp anymore. Didn't carry the weight of waiting for the next problem or the next phone call. It was a quiet that gave room to think, and thinking came easily. I found myself reflecting not on the legal steps or the arguments, but on how betrayal doesn't arrive with noise. It grows in silence, in the spaces where people don't look closely enough. My brother didn't become who he is overnight. It happened slowly in the gaps between responsibility and pride. Walking through the memories of our childhood, I realized his cruelty had never been loud or fierce. It wasn't driven by strength. It was shaped by entitlement, by the belief that he deserved more simply because he wanted more. He mistook volume for power, confidence for authority. All of it was built on the unspoken assumption that others would carry what he dropped. When that kind of mindset takes root, it spreads easily. And by the time someone sees it clearly, it's already tangled deep. Sitting alone in the living room one evening, I thought about the way power changes people, especially within families. There's a dangerous comfort in believing blood protects you from consequences. It can make even small deceptions feel justified. My brother leaned on that comfort until it collapsed under its own weight. He didn't expect anyone to question him, not the lawyer, not the family, not me. But power built on assumption breaks quickly once light reaches it. If there is one lesson I took from the past months, it's the importance of paying attention. Elders especially need to document everything, ask questions, and trust those quiet instincts that tighten the chest before the mind catches up. Problems don't disappear because you hope they will. And silence doesn't protect you from someone who benefits from your vulnerability. My mother tried to shield us both, but in the end, she realized only action, not trust, could keep her wishes intact. I chose peace after all of it, not because the situation was light, but because bitterness takes too much space inside a life that's already shifting with age. My mother didn't leave me this home to carry resentment through each room. She left it so I would have something steady, something that felt like her, something that kept me from drifting into the shadows she spent her life pulling me out of. Honoring her meant living without the weight my brother tried to place on my shoulders. I walked through the house one afternoon, touching the back of the chair she always pulled close to the window. The cushion still held a faint imprint from the way she used to sit. A small crack in the floorboard near the hallway reminded me of the night she dropped a mug and laughed instead of crying. The scent of her favorite soap still lingered in the linen closet. These small details held more truth than any document ever could. They were reminders of a life built with care, not exploitation. In those quiet moments, I understood the full arc of what had happened. I didn't lose a brother. I simply stopped pretending he was someone he never was. And I didn't gain a house. I gained the clarity my mother hoped I would receive when she placed her trust where it finally belonged. Standing by her portrait again, in the same place this all began, the final truth settled into place. Simple, grounded, and unshaken. Growing old isn't the danger. Trusting the wrong person inside your own family is.